Hi, welcome to Miss Richardson's U.S. History 5-minute lecture. This information will be U.S. Notes 6.3, Economics of the 80s and 90s. It includes information that goes along with the first section on your Unit 6 study guide. Now remember, you have control over this lecture, so use your study guide to figure out what's important to write down, pause if you need to, rewind if you need to, and write down any questions you have and bring those to class. Let's go ahead and get started. The last set of notes, I told you a bit about how technology impacted poverty, so now I want to look at the economics of both the 80s and 90s very briefly, in 5 minutes. So in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan became president and faced fixing the economic problems of the previous decade. Stagflation, inflation, unemployment, and the oil crisis, all of those had to be dealt with in Reagan's economic policy. He's trying to recover from those. He chose to use a system called supply-side or trickle-down economics. We also sometimes call it Reaganomics. The aim was to reduce government spending, reduce taxes, reduce government regulation, and control the money supply to end inflation. Many of these goals were campaign promises Reagan had made to the public, and he wanted to keep them. The cuts to taxes were, for the most part, top-down cuts. This is where trickle-down comes in. Taxes were cut for businesses and the wealthy, with the goal of them passing their savings on to their workers. So most workers, unfortunately, never saw the same gains the owners saw. However, the economy did grow during this time. Income tax rates dropped from 70% to 28% between 81 and 88. Unemployment, which had reached 10.7% in 1982, then decreased as the economy improved. Inflation rates decreased and jobs were created. This was coupled with a massive governmental spending, especially in defense, which meant 8 straight years of deficit spending, or spending money that the government did not take in. The U.S. national debt tripled during Reagan's 8 years in office, from $1 trillion to $3 trillion. So while wealthy Americans grew wealthier in the 1980s, the lower and middle class Americans remained stagnant in terms of growth of wealth under supply-side economics. So here you can kind of see the growth from 80 to 90 in the top 1%, poorest fifth 20% stayed the same, and in middle class it raised slightly but not a lot. Now in the 1990s, the economic policy changed again. So in 1992, Bill Clinton became president and had 3 main economic goals. 1, fiscal discipline that would reduce the deficit. Number 2, investing in people through education and training. And number 3, opening foreign markets so Americans could compete abroad. So these 3 goals led to an average of 4% economic growth per year for the 8 years Clinton was president. Over 22.5 million jobs were created during that same 8 years. In addition, Clinton kept his promise to be fiscally responsible. In 1995, 96, 97, and 1998, the U.S. had a balanced budget, meaning they did not spend more than they took in. In fact, in 1998, the U.S. government had a surplus. They actually had extra money left over at the end of the year. Crazy. This by no means meant that everyone supported Clinton. In fact, in 1995, the Republicans in Congress forced a government shutdown for 27 days in protest of Clinton's budget. They didn't like some of the cuts he made. That actually backfired because it angered many Americans and it helped Clinton win re-election in 96. But overall, the economy rose under both Reagan and Clinton, just in different ways. Under Reagan, businesses grew and profits boomed. Under Clinton, workers gained purchasing power and jobs were created. So depending on how you measure wealth, you would look at those 2 differently. And we'll spend some time looking at both of these in class so you really understand the economics of the decade. But for right now, this is the end of Note 6.3. Hopefully you learned something, and I'll see you in class with any questions you have.